So for this, I've created this project called Flex CSS, which is basically a Svelte app, but we're just going to write some CSS and HTML. So I've started the dev server, and if you're doing CSS, I highly recommend using Firefox. Their tooling is much better in terms of how the debugging that they provide in the inspector and compared to Chrome and other browsers. So for now, we're just going to use Firefox. If I create, let me create a container, and this is going to be the div that's going to house all the elements that we're going to lay out with Flex. So currently, if you see by default, the body element gets a bit of margin. So let's add some global CSS to reset that. Let's add a margin of 0, padding of 0, and yeah, that should be fine. Now let's put some elements within our div. The first one being, let's add a paragraph saying some text, subscribe to my channel. All right, and then let's put a button saying subscribe. All right, so looks pretty normal here. So now if we so we want to lay out these two elements with Flex. So the first thing that we want to understand is how Flex works, and what's the absolute fundamentals of Flex. So the first thing is that Flex is a one-dimensional tool, which means that you can either place items horizontally, this direction, or vertically. So here, since we have two elements, we, by default in HTML, things flow from left to right, and then they trickle down to the next line. So here, this is basically vertical positioning. So to make this work, what we have to do is, first we'll make sure that since we are going to position these two elements, this is a container. So we'll add some CSS to the container saying that display is flex, which means that this will now use the flex positioning. You see things started to change. Let me comment this and check the browser here. If I remove flex, they were getting placed one below the other. When I add flex, they get placed side by side, so which is horizontally, right? So this is governed by the property called flex direction, and by default this value is row, so things will get placed next to each other starting from left going towards right. So if we do flex direction column, flex direction row, nothing changes because that's the default. Let's say we want it one below the other, so we'll do column, and see some things are changing, but that's fine for now. Also with flex you can do column reverse, which will reorder the elements in your div. So if I do column reverse, the button goes to the top. So now we'll just set that to column, and what we want to do next is basically center everything. So if you look at the way, and Firefox has this really cool feature, if you click the flex button next to anything that has a display flex, or it's also available here in the rules tab, it shows you what the elements within that flex look like. So here if you see, there's a thicker border around the entire div, so that's the whole div, and the two elements. So one is the p tag, which has a bit of margin, and this is the button. So what we want to do here is basically place everything at the center, which is somewhere around here. So if you see, currently we are trying to the flex direction is column, so vertical. That's called the primary axis of flex, and now we're trying to place this in the center, which is in the opposite direction, so that's perpendicular to the primary axis. So anything that's perpendicular to your primary axis means that the property name will start with align, and the property we're looking for is called align items, and this will set as center. So what will happen is now, since this is a p tag, by default they're trying to stretch the entirety of the div. When we do align item center, this will take both of these elements and put them in the center, and they will only take up the space that's required for them. So if I save that, you see, and turn that button on, you see they only take up this much space. That's all right. So what's the default align items then? So that they were trying to stretch to the whole width, right, which is the secondary axis. So that means it's stretch. So this is the default. Let's go back to center. Right. So one thing that's really difficult to do as a beginner in CSS is placing things vertically and horizontally centered on the screen. There are a few different ways to do this, and there are some new properties in CSS that have made this even more simpler. But with Flex, we'll see how to do that. So for one, since we want to place this entire div in the center, we'll make the body as a flex. So we'll just do display flex, and then since by default things should be placed one below the other, I will just make the flex direction as column. So you see nothing has changed yet, but if I click body, that has also become a flex. Now the thing to note about flex is that flex works only within the bounds of the container. So currently, if you see, the body is covering only that part that the div requires. So even if we change the try to put this at the center of the screen, we can't, because the body's boundaries are limited to this purple box. So what we need to do first is set the body to the entirety of the window. And to do that, since there's only going to be one body, we can do width of 100 viewport width and height of 100 viewport height. What that does is, you see this, all of this started showing as dashes, which means that there is space available there, but we're not using it yet. So, and you can see that if I hover over body, it's covering the entirety of the page. Now what we need to do is put this at the center vertically, and since we've already done it horizontally, we don't really need to do anything. So currently we have flex direction as column, and we're trying to put this in the center, which is along the same axis. So if the primary axis of flex and the axis that you're trying to change the behavior on are same, then the property names start with justify. So this is justify content, and the value is going to be at the center, so it's going to be center. So now you see we've put the div right at the center of the screen. And the beauty of it is, even if there are multiple elements, so let me create another p tag here, hello, all of those will come at the center, and the reason they're not coming here is because they're occupying the entire width. So they're still centered, but it looks like that way because the text itself is not centered. So to fix that, we can just do a text align, and then that will put them in the center. So yeah, so everything's vertically aligned, vertically centered as well. So let's remove that for now. So those are basically the three main properties of Flex in terms of positioning. So now let's do one thing. Let's add one more button saying, what should we do here? Let's do a tweet, or rather share, that makes sense. So you see this also got placed next to the button below it because the flex direction is column. But what if we want to put these buttons side by side? I mean, that makes more sense, right? That's how traditional design looks like. And if you remember, I talked about Flex being a one-dimensional system. So what you have to do for this is you're going to have to put these two buttons in a separate div, and then make that div a flex. So what I mean by that is I have a class, let's do actions container, and then here we can do, this is a class, so it needs a period at the starting, and we'll make this as display flex. So since display flex is going to make flex direction row, they're automatically going to get placed side by side. Something broke there. Actions container, might have screwed up something already, so let's check it out. This is the flex. I think so. Flex direction might have gotten inherited from its parent, so let's specifically say row. Yeah, so flex direction also gets inherited. I learned that as we saw this demo, so that's cool. So yeah, let me click that again. So you see, if I click it again, this is bound to the space that the buttons require. If we increase that a little bit, let's say width of 50% of its parent, you see this is the 100% width, the entire window, and that's 50% of the width. Now this has become left aligned, which is the flex's start. So what that means is, since that's the primary axis horizontal, justify content is actually flex start, so nothing changes. If I want to center that, I'll have to do justify content of center. Now there are some cool things that you can do with flex, is that since you can do justify content center, there are also more options available here. You can see lots, and one thing that you can do is, let's say we have this much space, which is the 50% that we assigned here, and we want to somehow move these buttons a little bit away so that they don't stick to each other. What we can do is justify content of space evenly, and what that will do is the space between the buttons and the sides is going to be the same. So now you see all these three spaces, they're exactly the same. And you can experiment with this, but some other values that are quite popular is space between, which means they're going to be spread apart and put at the very end. So yeah, that's the very basics of flex. I have a cheat sheet here. So the basics being it's a one-dimensional layout system, and it places its immediate children without its limits, which means that it's going to place only it's going to place the elements only within its bounds. As we saw, we had to make the body the entirety of the page. On the container, we have to do display flex, and direction is decided by flex direction. That's also on the container, and that's row by default. And also it gets inherited. So the behavior on the primary axis, if you want to change something, which means that if this is your flex and the primary axis is vertical, and you want to position things along this axis, that's going to be justify content, and you use the appropriate value there. If you're trying to do something on the axis that's perpendicular to your primary axis, it's going to be align items. On the children, oh, I completely forgot to add this, but basically on the children there are similar properties which we're going to look at in a different video. So for now, let's go and whoops, remove that part. So this is going to be like live video, and obviously I'm not going to edit this. So yeah, so basically I've already said what I'm going to do in the later videos. So we're going to look at a few more important properties on flex, but properties that are going to be on the child items. So in terms of our example, it's going to be these right here. So this and this, what CSS properties we can add there to position them. So this was the first episode on my naive understanding of, and hope you like this. If you want to suggest some topics that you have a naive understanding of and want to showcase that, I'd really like to understand how that works, and surely we'll make a video on it. So yeah, be sure to like, comment, and share this video. Also, I've put links to Instagram and Twitter on this in the description. So yeah, this was the first episode. Cool. Later.